Hello there, everybody. My name is Adam Sell. I'm the Director of Marketing Operations here at Edgewise Networks, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on Zero Trust in the Real World. Today, we're going to be exploring how Golston & Storrs, a high-profile AmLaw 200 law firm based in Boston, is using Zero Trust to enhance their security and visibility into their corporate network. Now, law firms have recently been in a cybersecurity renaissance in an effort to better secure their critical applications and client data, especially in light of last year's ransomware attack on DLA Piper, which is another high-profile firm. Now, Golston & Storrs' shift from an address-centric view of network security to an application-centric view of network security enables them to better visualize the paths that attackers might take to access sensitive information and lock them down, stopping lateral movement and simplifying protection to a single click. Your hosts for today are Matthew Finnegan, Golston & Storrs' Senior Infrastructure Manager, myself, the Director of Marketing Operations at Edgewise, and Adam Lewinter, our Senior Sales Engineer at Edgewise. Now, Matt, could you tell us a little bit about Golston & Storrs? What should our audience know about the firm?
Sure. Golston is we're an AmLaw 200 firm. We're a little over 100 years old, about 450 employees, just over 200 of which are attorneys. Our biggest practice is real estate. We're located in Boston, Washington, D.C., and New York.
Great. Now, could you also tell us a little bit about what your role as the Senior Infrastructure Manager at Golston means? What is the role that you play in this kind of an equation here?
Certainly. We're not a large IT organization, so security falls under infrastructure, as well as networking, servers, virtualization. So this is the sort of stuff I need to know about.
Well, thank you so much. And jumping right into it, now Zero Trust networking, for anybody who isn't already familiar with it, is the idea of assuming that all of the traffic within your network is hostile and designing a security posture with that in mind. And in practice, it's really the concept of reducing the role of addresses in security policy. Addresses are far too easily spoofed and firewalls much too easily tricked to rely on addresses for security verification purposes. Edgewise's approach to Zero Trust networking is an agent-based approach, identifying the workloads in your network, assessing the overexposure of those workloads, and using machine learning to automatically develop application identity-based policies to secure those pathways with a single click. Now, Matt, how did Golston & Storrs come to be aware of the Zero Trust networking concept?
Well, our CIO was made aware of the product, Edgewise, and brought it to me to look at it and see if it would fit our needs.
Now, it's important to recognize that Zero Trust networking doesn't have to be an enormous 5-year project. There are steps that our listeners and their organizations can take to get from zero to Zero Trust. Golston & Storrs, for instance, got to where they are now over just a couple of steps, the first of which is gaining a greater understanding of the topology of their applications within their network. And if our listeners' ultimate goal is to protect the workloads and the paths by which they communicate, it's a fairly logical but crucial first step to see those workloads and how they're communicating already. So, Matt, when you first saw the application topology that Edgewise can offer you, were there any unexpected communication patterns among the applications in your network?
Absolutely. A really good example is our monitoring and performance recording product. It's off-the-shelf software. Turns out, rather than a small set of monolithic EXEs, it is dozens of small components that all run as discrete executables on the monitoring hosts. So that was something that sticks right out. They make a lot of SQL connections, and they make a lot of connections to the servers that they monitor.
And from there, once you have that visibility into your application topology, the next step is to measure what might be incurring. Quantifying that risk allows anybody on this process to easily prioritize their protection strategy based on the assessed risk. So how useful has it been for you, Matt, to be able to see at a glance the risk assessment of any given workload?
Oh, enormously, and it's quite easy on the console there. It's spelled right out for you.
And once an organization has a sense of how much risk and overexposure the workloads are incurring, they can move on to the protection stage of the journey here. And you can explore policies that eliminate or reduce the overexposure and then apply them to secure the workloads and the pathways connecting them. So let's take a look at some specific challenges that Golston and Storrs was working to solve as they explored Zero Trust with Edgewise. The first challenge that Golston and Storrs was looking to solve centers on visibility, the first step of their Zero Trust journey. Now, Matt and his team didn't have the visibility and insight they wanted into how the applications in their network were communicating with one another. And insufficient visibility brings with it some hidden challenges. Without a strong sense of communication patterns, security and infrastructure professionals can sometimes struggle to visualize the pathways that attackers might take to get from the globally routable internet to the sensitive information lying inside the network. And an inability to visualize those pathways of attack will make response a little bit slower, making it less likely that a response team can prevent the exfiltration of sensitive information. How were you experiencing this challenge at Golston, Matt?
Oh, other than the general case solution that you described there, there were a number of other things we found in here. This was very helpful with essentially a post hoc discovery of our existing environment. We had a number of undocumented off-the-shelf apps used by the business. They were important. And we weren't sure which components were dependent on other components, same server, other servers. This was able to pull those things up.
And looking forward a little bit at how Edgewise works to resolve this problem, the solution is to get an assessment of the risk and overexposure of the workloads within the network. And this screenshot on the screen now shows you what it looks like in the Edgewise platform. From a single pane, you can see how many pathways of communication are protected, how many of them are unprotected, and how much additional protection you can gain by applying the machine learning generated policies that Edgewise has created. Now, Adam, would you tell us a bit about how Edgewise creates this report?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you know, it's key to understand what it is that you know and what it is you don't know. So the Edgewise solution is deployed via agents, and these agents serve two purposes. First, they're going to collect information about what is actually communicating on the network, what applications are communicating in what ways. The second thing they're going to do is actively probe the network so that we can understand what is possible to communicate with, even though it may not be used at the moment. And what that allows us to do then is compare what is possible versus what is needed by the application as they're communicating on the network, and provide then a number, a solid metric that says, here is the overexposure of this application on the network. It only needs these set few paths of communication, and yet all of these are available. And from there, help you to target where you want to lock down your environment such that only those trusted applications are communicating on the network.
Thank you, Adam. Now, the heart of the idea of Zero Trust is to stop considering address-based controls as sufficient to protect sensitive data. Addresses can be spoofed, and malicious payloads can sail right through even next-generation firewalls. Addresses don't work well enough as verifiers to serve that function, not anymore. Zero Trust flips the script and says, if addresses don't work, let's not build policy around them anymore. So Matt, in what ways have address-based controls been troublesome for Golston and Storrs?
The effort to redesign into microsegmentation and then maintain that meant that we weren't really using address-based controls for security. That makes them fairly troublesome.
And the way to resolve one of the challenges of address-based controls is to reframe the conversation around the application, as the screenshot now on the screen shows you. With Edgewise Protect, you can see the pathway from the globally routable internet all the way through to the database within your cloud or data center, and all of the applications and workloads that an attacker might pass through to get there. So Adam, can you tell us a bit more about what we're looking at in this screenshot? What are, for example, unmanaged addresses?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see this in greater detail as we go through the live demonstration here towards the end. But essentially what we're looking at is the topology mapping of how applications are communicating in the environment. And once again, our agents are installed on these machines, which allows us to get the understanding of those application-to-application communication. But what about the case where you can install an agent for whatever reason it might be? That's where these unmanaged addresses come into play, so that we can actually still help you protect those devices or those instances where the agent is unable to install, and we can still provide that security control that you need going in or out of a edgewise controlled device. So that's really what the unmanaged addresses are helping to represent there, so that we can be that full environment protection.
Now, looking very closely at this particular screen here, I can see that there is a pathway clear from the globally routable internet all the way into the Mongo database. How quickly could an attacker get from that wild west of the globally routable internet to that Mongo database if the pathway weren't locked down as it is in this screenshot?
You know, it's a great question, and what we've really seen and heard from customers that we interact with on a daily basis is that most organizations have a strong perimeter. But what happens when something gets through? Well, at that point, attackers usually have the dwell time that is so massive that they have the ability to move through the environment at their leisure. They have the ability to find the information they need, steal credentials, figure out that lateral movement, and get through environments, because there aren't controls, or if there are, they're extremely coarse-grained segmentation controls that are in place in the environment, which means it's extremely easy for the reconnaissance to occur. Typically just a net stat will tell you what's communicating, and then the probing can start to see how you can get across. And there's no control in place. There's no security barrier that would stop them from doing any of this while they still stay invisible to most security tools. So Edgewise really helps to isolate them and freeze the attacker in place wherever they may enter through that perimeter, and put up additional barriers to greatly increase that dwell time and give other security tools or security practitioners the ability to notice that they're in the environment, or just frustrate attackers to the point where they try to find the next easier target because they can't move laterally in your environment.
Now, the third challenge that Golston & Storrs was facing is a common one to many organizations. Security folks understand, of course, the concept of least privilege access, but the challenge here is really executing on it. And how can a security operations center really lock down the pathways based on intended user privileges and ensure that nothing can escape those rule sets? Edgewise's patented machine learning system develops application-centered policies, which, by the way, you need much fewer of to affect the same protection, and presents them to you for your go or no-go. They're designed to enforce the intended state of your environment, which the machine learning system learns by observing the patterns of communication in the network over a period of time. Within only a few days of deploying Edgewise agents, you'll have the confidence to apply these automatically generated policies and know what the impact will be, what you're expecting it to be. Now, Adam, what is the Edgewise platform looking for when it's designing policies like this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and a common concern that practitioners have when looking at these zero trust platforms or solutions such as Edgewise, which can also accomplish microsegmentation, as Matt mentioned earlier, is the manageability of it. And how do you handle dynamic environments which might have moving parts, auto-scaling groups, containerized environments, things that just make it a lot more dynamic and harder to manage in a address-centric world. The whole concept of the machine learning from Edgewise is to increase the simplicity of the solution for the practitioner. What we're able to do is have the machine learning watch and observe how applications are communicating in the environment. And then what it does is it builds an optimal set of policies. And what we optimize for are two things. First, we need to cover the entire environment. And second, we're optimizing for the fewest number of policies to cover that environment. We want to make those human readable policies that you can understand. So from a practitioner standpoint, as we see in the screenshot here, you're saying the user application is allowed to talk to Mongo database. You're not saying this IP address is allowed to talk to this IP address and port across this protocol, which is a little bit more abstract and harder for application developers or other general IT staff to understand, what is that actually representing? What is that mapping to? So these readable policies are optimized so that you can simply just, with the one click, say, yes, this should be allowed to communicate, or no, it should not. And without having to write a single 5-tuple or have any type of IP port or protocol understanding, you have now been able to protect the workload of the environment as it's traveling through the untrusted network, allowing you to have that very simplistic ability to apply policy without needing to know any of the underlying network controls or infrastructure. And the other side there is, as this, because it's machine learning, as your dynamic environment changes, we will adapt and continually understand those changes and apply that optimization of the policies such that you constantly have that set of policies that is most optimized for your environment.
So now taking a quick step back, zooming out to the 30,000-foot view, a look at what Edgewise offers Goulston and stores. It's real-time, up-to-date visibility into how their applications communicate. It's an assessment of the overexposure and risk of any workload within the environment, allowing for the prioritization of protection based on those risk factors. And it's the opportunity to lock down communication pathways and execute on the concept of least privilege access. It really boils down to gaining more insight into your network and using that insight to determine your next steps, with the added benefit of having a machine learning system suggest those next steps to you for one-click execution. Protection strategies based on workload identities are the ultimate goal of Zero Trust networking. Goulston and stores have realized the benefits of Zero Trust and now enjoy a much greater visibility into their network communication patterns, enabling Matt and his team to apply policies that enforce least privilege access, stop attackers' lateral movement, and secure the pathways from the Wild West to the sensitive client data at the heart of the Goulston and stores network. At this time, I'm going to turn over the keyboard and mouse to my colleague Adam Lewinter, who's going to show us just how Edgewise works firsthand and what the platform looks like for users.
Absolutely. And so you saw the screenshots of the environment as we walked through the presentation here, but let's take a look at what it actually looks like as we interact with it. And so the first screen that you see when you log into the Edgewise platform is that risk and network exposure assessment. How exposed is it, overexposed, I should say, is this application on the environment? Across the top here, we see the summary for the entire environment summed together. How overexposed as a whole is the environment? And then below, we start to see each application on a host and how overexposed that individual application or instance of that application is, depending upon where it is. So you can imagine that from this, you want to start to focus on perhaps the most important part of your environment, which is typically your data stores. So if we jump down here to look at and filter to look at just the Mongo database instances, I now have a summary of how all of the Mongo instances in my entire environment are performing. And then I can click into an individual instance to start to dive in and understand what the actual environment looks like and how things are communicating in that environment. So what this is going to allow me to do is take a look at how applications are communicating in the environment from the view or vantage point of that Mongo database. So the first thing that we have listed here are all of the applications that are actually on the host itself. So we see Mongo database is not the only application making network connections, but it's the one that we're most interested in. So let's take a look here, and we'll start to understand how this is going to communicate through the environment. The other thing that's extremely important to look at here is the idea that, once again, we're tying this to the application's identity. These policies are from the identity perspective, and the policies are tied to these identities. So what you're going to be able to do is understand how this is communicating on the network such that you can apply policies to those applications rather than to the IPs and ports of the hosts on which they live. So what we're going to be able to show there is the ability to understand what those individual pathways look like, apply policies to those, and simply be able to say yes or no should those pathways be allowed to communicate. And that's what that's going to be able to present you on the screen here. I do apologize that we do seem to have a slight lag time in our webinar presentation here. So I think what we'll say is, if you're really interested in seeing this, what we'll want to be able to do is feel free to reach out. We'll be able to share some information and documentation around what that looks like, as well as schedule individual screenshot sharing sessions to really dive into what this is actually going to be able to do for you.
Thank you very much, Adam. And at this time, we're going to open the floor up to questions from the audience. I've already got a couple in hand that I want to ask my co-presenters here. The first one of which is for Matt. Question is, what would you tell your colleagues who might be interested in Zero Trust and how it works? Other people who work in the law tech field, what would you tell them?
This is a fantastic tool. It's given us such visibility into our environment that we otherwise wouldn't have. Certainly for security, the zero trust networking model is very, very interesting, and just for operational needs as well.
Hello, everybody. Apologies for the disconnection there. We lost connection for just a moment, but we're back. And thank you for jumping in there, Matt. I apologize that we weren't here to hear the end of your answer, but thank you so much for jumping in and talking about how you would tell your colleagues about Zero Trust networking. The next question that I have in hand is for my colleague Adam here. And the question that I've got is, how could an organization that is interested in starting the Zero Trust journey, how could they get started in a limited way, in some sort of finite capacities, so that they could see how it works before they deployed it system-wide?
Yeah, absolutely. And we understand that this is a new concept in terms of security controls, and we want to make sure that you feel comfortable with it before you have to push it, environment-wide. So what we typically see is that most environments, and we did this with Goulston and Store and Matt and his team, is we will start with an individual application that's of interest. Maybe pick a three-tiered application, a web-facing application in your DMZ, whatever it might be. And we'll show you how we can deploy the agents extremely quickly and without any need for configuration. And then from there, we'll be able to move on and take a look at how we can start to protect those applications. So once we have visualized their communication inside of the topology map, we can then see how those one-click application policy can really make it easy to lock down the environment as you would expect, and build trust from there, and start to then feel confident as we continue to start to expand slowly and slowly from there. So it really doesn't need to be a large deployment all at once. It can start with a simple single application.
Now I've got another question here for Adam. The question is, does Edgewise support microservice platforms? Can the agents run inside containers?
Yes, absolutely, and that's one of the key differences of our architecture versus what's standard out there. Is we're designed to run in today's environments, which are cloud environments, either public or private, and with virtualized technologies such as your hypervisors and your containers. So we are absolutely able to install into containerized environments, Kubernetes swarms, Docker, whatever it might be. And the agents are able to understand the differences between applications in each container per container host, allowing us to get the same application level controls inside of a traditional dynamic container environment.
Now, I personally love to try to give people a little bit of their time back during the day when we have the opportunity. So I know that this has been a relatively short webinar, and I hope that people are grateful that they get a little bit of time back. If you have any additional questions about Edgewise or about how we can work within your particular environment, feel free to visit us at edgewise.net or reach out to us by email at sales@edgewise.net. Thank you all for joining us today, and have a great day.